Recording starting.
How would you describe your teaching philosophy?
My teaching philosophy is student-centered. For many years, I have been teaching both English composition and 2000 level courses, and most of my pedagogy is focused on reaching each individual student and not treating them like a number. In order to do so, I build an ethical classroom in which everyone has a voice. Everyone has different skill sets, strengths, and weaknesses, and that my classroom is a place in which everyone can work to become better writers, to become more comfortable with themselves, and to become more comfortable with creating their own arguments, and whether it is in class discussions or in the written format. To this end, I also construct my student hours, also known as office hours, as a place that students can come to ask questions, to get help in terms of modeling the proper way of writing a thesis statement, rhetorical analysis, and other major components of critical thinking and writing. I will also even take days where I will step back and go over problematic areas that I notice the entire class is having problems with. Because I feel that as a teacher, I am only as good as how I can reach my students. And as a professor at a university, part of my obligation is reaching as many students as I can to help them succeed in their major, in their required courses that they take with me, and their future career paths.
Why do you think you would be a good fit for this institution, and what do you bring to the department that is unique?
I believe that I'm a good fit for this institution because of my values, ethics, and morals, which fall in line with the mission statement of reaching students, a high achievement status for the students, challenging them to become better individuals, both academically and as citizens. And I feel as though that I could contribute a great deal to the institution by the way in which I try to teach the students to think outside the box, to apply the things that they learn in my class to other classes, and to grapple with some of the more sensitive ethical concerns that can be found in literature and in writing and current events that I use in my classes. In regards to the department, I feel as though I would be a good fit because of my background in medieval literature and rhetoric, but also because of the fact that I am also a generalist and I can teach a wide array of courses, both the required courses of rhetoric and composition, advanced writing, as well as poetry, fiction, drama, and nonfiction. My interdisciplinary nature of my work helps me to connect with other departments and forge better relationships among the departments in which we could create new programs for interdisciplinary work. We could create new student organizations that would help with bringing more of a spotlight to the English department and to help garner more English majors and minors. And I feel that my research interests and my specialization is very complementary to those that are already in the department, and then I could help them as much as I can learn from them.
What would you consider your most successful course that you have taught to non-majors?
My most successful course is a 2000 level course, which is supernatural figures in fiction. It was an incredibly popular course. Most of the students coming into these 2000 level intro to fiction courses were expecting to read the same things that they did in high school. So instead, I decided to make an engaging course that looks at why people are still obsessed with certain types of folk belief, such as demons, ghosts, the monsters of H.P. Lovecraft, and other non-human villains, for them to, by the end of the course, write a research paper on one of the novels, delving into some of the core ideas, whether it be racism and H.P. Lovecraft, whether it be the question of good and evil and C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, the nature of possession and psychiatry and psychology when reading The Exorcist, or even alternate views of the apocalypse with Neil Gaiman's Good Omens. I allowed them the space in which they could experiment with their writing, they could experiment with their thought process. They could use not only the novels, but some of the secondary works that I pulled from history, science, literature, pop culture, and religion of not only Christianity, but Judaism and Islam, for them to get a better idea of why are people so obsessed with these ideas? Why is it still popular? And whether or not you believe in a higher power, how do you grapple with these ideas? So most of the classwork and every day was discussion. They had reflection papers to grapple with some of the more complex ideas and themes. And then they had their research paper, and they had an assignment of research proposals so that I could approve them, so that I could make sure that they were on the right track in terms of doing the research process. But they were allowed to pick whatever they wanted to. And that was my most successful because I had everyone in the classroom discussing, asking questions, giving their reactions. We pulled in multimedia sources to look at the popular culture manifestations, and they learned how to critically think about authorial intent, themes, imagery, and all of the other required literary analysis while being engaged, and not just feeling it was a required course to get through to get to the rest of their major.
How do you teach the required first-year composition courses and make students interested in the course?
For the most part, in my past first-year composition courses, most of the assignments were normalized throughout the department. So for the first half of first-year composition, it was scaffolded assignments that would lead to the rhetorical analysis. And the second half, it was scaffolded assignments towards a major research paper. The ways in which I made this interesting, because the students feel like they're being forced to take it, is the way in which I created units of readings that dealt with current events. In one particular semester, we looked at the issue of the rise of the alt-right and how they used early English and Norse imagery. There was another unit on major conspiracy theories like the flat earthers. There was another unit on the marginalized groups in horror, such as the indigenous, such as BIPOC, and women. And I also had another low stakes unit that dealt with food cultures and conflicts within food cultures in case they felt uncomfortable taking a more current event stance. And so we would read through these readings. There were 3 readings per unit, and we would discuss and start picking out rhetorical devices, what the author was trying to argue, and basically breaking down the rhetorical analysis through these units and through the reaction to the readings in order to make it a lot more fun and that they had a little bit more independence and choice in what they wanted to write about based on one of the readings. Within the context of the second half, they had a short speech that they were required to do. They had longer papers on mapping out stakeholders, but outside of getting approval from me, they were allowed to write on whatever they wanted, with the caveat that they needed to take into account the counter argument, think about deeply on who stakeholders might be, even silent stakeholders. And I gave them free rein on how to construct their argument. Some went the traditional research paper route. Some of them did a presentation. One particular gentleman made a brochure that accompanied a presentation over concussions in the NFL. And his final presentation, he acted like he was presenting it to the head of NFL, Commissioner Goodell. So that's how I got my students interested in the course, was allowing them some freedom to experiment and to think about how they would talk to different people and what authors are trying to do to persuade them.
If you were asked to teach a survey course in British literature, what texts would you choose and why?
For a British survey course, I would most likely try to balance the length of my choices with the overall aim of the course. So thematically, ideally, your British survey course is going from the earliest to more modern literature to get these students an idea of the breadth of the kind of writing and the kind of genres that develop throughout the entire canon of British literature. One of the places where I disagree with some of the British literature survey books is that they often, well, until recently, they often left out marginalized voices such as women, non-white authors, stayed singularly with English authors. And so I would be choosing medieval poetry excerpts like Cædmon's Hymn and early English riddles so that they could get the idea of the religious and the secular themes of very early English, British literature. And start having the students look at the development historically, thematically, who is included, who isn't. I would move into early modern and probably pick something along the lines of Shakespeare's The Twelfth Night and some of his contemporaries and do excerpts of some of those plays so that they could get a broader understanding of that early modern literature was not just Shakespeare. And moving into the 18th century, I would most likely do excerpts from Alexander Pope. Yes, he is one of the traditional choices for an anthology, but it would be a focus on his political writings along with his poetry, as well as his religious convictions in juxtaposition to the religious majority at the time. I would also be including from this period Lady Montague Wortley, Aphra Baines Orinoco, so that they could get a broader sense that there were women writers that these women writers were not always prim and proper. They could write just as well as the men. They could have a battle of the wits with the men and often win against them. And in the case of Afrabeen, show the students that there are women writers that did travel, that did take up political stances, and go into her background. And then I would move on into the 19th century and into the modern period with probably Daniel Deronda, because that is the Jewish experience in the 19th century and the complications that come from a Jewish identity when Jews were not always accepted. And there was always anti-Semitism in Britain. I would also pull in Robert Burns' selections as well as Welsh poetry and Irish poetry so that they could get a broader sense of the voices of the British Isles, not just England. And in that, choose James Joyce's The Dubliners, of getting that middle class Irish experience.
Please discuss your dissertation.
My dissertation focused on early English sermons and homilies, particularly of Alfric of Eynsham and Wulfstan. And I took an interdisciplinary approach where I not only looked at literary research, rhetoric, but I also brought in history and religious doctrine to argue that the themes of the apocalypse and eschatology found in a lot of their works, along with the Vercelli and the Blickling homilies, shows that there is an intersectional anxiety between the larger community and the individual. So for most of these sermons and homilies, they were pointing at individual piety as a problem, wherein individual piety or a lack of piety could endanger public salvation. So all of the religious writers and preachers were using their sermons and homilies at specific times in history for early England, to try and bring the community back into the fold, back into proper religious doctrine, proper religious piety, because of the Norse invasions, because of destabilization of politics within what would become England, and the back and forth between the English and Norse kings. So these religious works actually worked on two levels. They're both religious, looking for salvation, the best way to get salvation, but also worked as almost a social and political commentary on how people should act in the face of all this instability.
Thank you.
Thank you. Why do you think you'd be a good fit for this institution and department?
I believe that I would be a good fit for the institution because I focus on the whole student and make sure that all of my courses are accessible to my students, which is one of the core tenets of the mission of the university. Furthermore, I am dedicated to advancing the aims of historiography and providing students with true and accurate representation of the past that can help them with form their own opinions, not only about history, but how they can learn from current events as well. My research is dedicated to marginalized voices, especially women, and working to uncover the local historiography of witchcraft, as well as its broader implications for European and American history. Furthermore, I feel like I am a good fit for the department because other faculty are working from interdisciplinary angle for their research, which highlights the core emphasis on new historiographical arguments that my own research and teaching emphasizes. While my specialization is in medieval and early modern studies, I have also cross-trained in American history and can cover a range of topics and time periods, which is advantageous in teaching the core American and world history courses, as well as constructing upper-level courses in my areas of expertise, especially within women's studies, religion, and folk belief. I feel that my varied background will be beneficial to the department because I can create different course offerings outside of the required American history courses that will advance the research of the department to garner more majors and minors, as well as to bring more variety to the course offerings and to make the department more competitive for graduate students.
How would you describe your teaching philosophy as it pertains to different levels of students that we teach?
My role as a history instructor is influenced by the idea that reading, interpretation, and critical thinking skills are essential to student development. And I create a classroom environment that fosters these kinds of learning. Furthermore, I use different types of sources, both secondary, primary, and visual sources, so the students can understand the specific period and events in a broader context. I also believe active learning is key. So I incorporate discussion and other activities that allow students to think outside the box in terms of problem solving and making arguments about historical events and writings. I also used multiple types of sources to facilitate learning and connecting it to their own majors and future careers. I focus on the connection between history and students' majors and future careers heavily for the required history courses, but I also tailor my teaching philosophy for upper level courses designed for majors and minors, as well as graduate students. One of the key points of my teaching philosophy when teaching majors and minors is helping them find their passion for history and to refine their research and writing skills to become more effective speakers and writers, especially if they are thinking of going on to graduate school. One of the key points of my philosophy for students is working as a mentor towards them and allowing them the space to experiment with their writing and to create their own research questions and arguments to fully realize their potential as historians. I have a similar attitude towards graduate students, where I try to be a mentor and help them learn how to navigate graduate school, as well as the demanding schedule of teaching and writing that is expected of them. I also work with them to get them ready for conferences and to push them to try to publish their work, often with working with them one on one to polish their writing and to fully understand the rigors of historiographical research and the use of primary sources as the backbone of their argument and writing.
What is your current research focused on, and what do you plan to do for short term goals?
My current research is focused on the folkloric and microhistories of the Scottish and Irish witchcraft trials, particularly in terms of how these women were cast as part of a diabolical pact with Satan. When examining the primary evidence, there are more social, cultural, political, and religious conflict in the background of these accusations of these women. In particular, most of the evidence is formed on the basis of a rejection of certain tenets of Protestantism, which could be a rejection of Christianity in favor of folk belief, or a rejection of Protestantism for Catholicism. In one example, a Scottish woman was accused of being a witch, and some of the evidence that witnesses produced were the fact that she did not regularly attend church, refused the renewal of baptismal rites, and even changed to a new name, one that is not her Christian name. Some of these points of evidence illuminate underlying problems with religious conflict in the community when examining the issue of baptism, name, and attendance. But the fact that this woman was only accused by a fellow witch highlights the larger problem within the community during the early modern period. Furthermore, the woman was convicted of her crimes, and the records are unclear about her fate. One record states a specific manner of execution, but the final records of the period show that she was hanged instead of the more severe execution, which raises further questions about political, social, and religious issues in early modern Scotland. My short-term goals are to present my initial findings at a conference and publish some of the results of my historiographical argument, but I will eventually be creating a monograph on the larger issues found within the microhistories of these women against the backdrop of Protestant Scotland.
What kind of research do you plan on conducting for the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, I'm planning to expand my research into witchcraft through the application of disability theory and intersectionality, as well as the role of folk belief in the prosecution of accused witches. I am also planning a larger monograph on the role of horror within the context of experience in medieval and early modern Europe, particularly in the form of how these emotions are extrapolated from the fears of the other in the form of religious women, marginalized groups, and alternative religious belief based on folk belief. I'm also planning on co-authoring works on spiritual belief in England and America with a literary scholar in order to bring in historiographical implications of spiritualism and the legacy of this movement. With popular literary works dealing with these ideas within the Gothic and supernatural genres to show how popular culture is continually influenced by historiographical fact.
How do you get your students engaged with the required first-year American history courses?
One of the ways I get my students engaged in the required first-year American history courses is through humor and little-known historical facts about the period. The students are so used to dealing with dry lectures about American history that I bring in humor about the situation in order to make the historical events and figures more accessible to the students. I also allow them to informally debate some of the events and the decisions, making them responsible for learning the material so they can mock debate other students. In addition, during my post-1865 courses, I will sometimes create interactive games, such as Find the Communist, in order to have the students question everyone in the room and find the two students designated as communists so they understand why the Red Scare and McCarthyism made such an impact.
Shifting tactics a little bit, what is your experience in disciplinary work, and how do you integrate an interdisciplinary method into your research and teaching?
My dissertation was based on interdisciplinary work, as I worked with the English department in addition to the historians on my committee. I had extensive crossover courses during my master's and doctoral program, where I was learning political science, literature, and folklore in order to complete my research. I integrate this into my research because most of my research not only involves historiography, but also literary works, religious doctrine, and theory. I introduce interdisciplinary sources into the classroom because I have my students read and discuss a wide variety of sources to understand the period, as well as allowing them to bring in sources into their writing to cover scientific and other hard science development and how it influenced historiographical events. I also encourage history majors and minors to take a wide variety of courses in both the humanities and the sciences in order to help them with their interests in history. In addition, I argue that graduate students need to be made aware that interdisciplinary work is essential to the deeper understanding of history and to expand the horizon to include other sources that are not strictly historiographical works, as their thesis and dissertation topics would benefit from examining the problem from multiple angles and create deeper analysis for their professional work.
Thank you.
Thank you.